Kenshi. There's deserts, barren wastelands, and everyone looks like they haven't discovered running water yet. In a land where the largest empires are mainly funded by one thing and one thing only, it's time to talk about today's subject.
Slavery.
Yes, slavery. Not only is it America's favorite pastime, but you can also find it all throughout Kenshi. Factions like the Holy Nation Empire and the United Cities both utilize the old NCAA method, but for the importance of today's video, I want to focus on a very specific location. That being the Rebirth Mines, also known as the Slave Start. Now, for new players, this is one of the most difficult starts in the entire game. You spawn trapped within the Rebirth Mines, surrounded by Holy Nation guards with mid-range weapons and combat stats, and you're starving, which makes escape nearly impossible. But eventually, a few hundred hours go by, and you start to learn the great cheese methods that make Kenshi so much fun. Then, and only then, will you come to realize that the Slave Start might actually just be the most broken and overpowered start in the game, at least in terms for building a hilariously powerful character through the means of pure cheese. Which brings us to the Great Rebirth Challenge. What's the Rebirth Challenge, Preds? Hold on, I'm getting to it. The Rebirth Challenge is really simple. Essentially, you're soft-locked to the Rebirth Mines with the sole goal of sculpting your starting character into a demigod, using only the resources found throughout Rebirth. This means no tossing animals into sleeping mats and punching them until PETA shows up. Instead, you can only use what's available to you within the mines. Again, this isn't necessarily a difficult challenge, I just have a ton of fun doing it, and to me, it's just a really enjoyable experience. If you are new to Kenshi and want to try this challenge out for yourself, that's great. I'll break down the methods and cheese that I employ as I do it to hopefully provide a better understanding as to what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. Does that make sense? Awesome, let's get to the video. Meet the protagonist of our story, Mike Oxmal. He's tall, handsome, but there's just one downside. First things first, we need to get into a prison cage. This is because, by default, we're not a slave yet. Well, kind of, we're technically an escaped slave. Getting in a cage prompts the guards to come over and actually enslave you, thus beginning the run. While I waited for the guards to come over though, I took the time to start stockpiling shackles. If you don't know, shackles are our greatest tool while in Rebirth. I'll touch more on them when we get to combat, but for now, all you need to know is that you can throw them in your inventory to encumber yourself and work on strength passively while working the mines. The guards have an infinite amount of them, so you can do this indefinitely, which will come in handy later on. Now, there are several skills that can be leveled relatively passively inside of Rebirth. Strength is one of them, but the other is stealth. Since all the guards are hostile, you'll gain some large XP boosts every time you get relatively close to them. This works with two methods. The first is simply walking around the mines in stealth while being an obedient slave. I tend to just do this one at the start because you need boosts in all of your skills, so it doesn't really matter when you get caught, jumped, and beaten into a coma, because your toughness is still so low that at any fight, it's a huge plus. Speaking of fighting, Rebirth is a fantastic training ground for toughness, mainly because the guards just won't let you die. Now, sure, they can run out of bandages and leave you to bleed out, but 99% of the time, they'll just beat you into a coma, carry you over to a pole or a cage, and then heal you up. During the night is when you can really focus on the extra skills. It's the perfect time to focus on skills like Thievery and Assassination. Fun fact, if you're in these cages on the second floor of these buildings, you can actually loot the barrel and store all of your shackles in there for now, making stealth a bit more manageable. Look at this absolute Chad. He looks like if Starvin' Marvin got the Michael Jackson treatment. Anyway, I spent most of the first night power leveling Thievery. The best way to do this in Rebirth without fear of getting caught is to head into the shop on the ground floor of any building and grab a bunch of random gear, but making sure to avoid any food. I'll talk about food in a few minutes, so just hold on to that thought. Once you have a few cups and bowls and whatever else you can store in your inventory, take them to a spot where no guards are standing and start dropping and picking up the items. Thievery is all based on successful steal attempts and item prices. More expensive items that are harder to steal give you more XP, but the safest way to bypass the dangers of ripping gear off of people is to simply take a bunch of items and throw them on the floor. then pick them up, and then throw them on the floor again and again and again. This is because stealing items off of the floor is a 100% success rate as long as you're hidden. It doesn't alert any guards unless one of them is physically staring you in the eyes as you pick up the items. It's not the most efficient way to farm XP, but it's certainly the easiest and least difficult. By the time the sun rose on day 2, I was already up to 51 Thievery. Not bad for one night of grinding. Now it's time to work on strength. Really because I just wanted to heal up so I was healthy for the night. As I mentioned though, strength training can be entirely passive in Rebirth. It's quite literally as simple as loading up your inventory with 20 kilogram shackles, and then letting your character do his daily chores by walking all around the camp. Sure, there are much faster ways to level it, but this will do for now. This is what peak male physique looks like, ladies. So remember how I said not to steal any food? Well, that's because as long as you're an obedient slave in Kenshi, your hunger will not drop below 99. It's actually just kind of fluctuating between 99 and 100, leaving you malnourished enough for it to impact your strength, dexterity, and athleticism, but not enough to kill ya, meaning there's no need to eat the food around Rebirth yet. Instead, we'll save it for the escape attempt later on. Anyway, after boosting his strength up to level 4, it's time to get a good bit of that Kenshi cheese that we all love, starting with assassination attempts. For starters, I like to get into the cage closest to the beds. This sets you up to do some really dumb shit, like baiting a guard over to you by taking off your shackles. Once he's close, you can go into stealth mode and start spamming the pause button. While spamming the pause button, you can escape without the guard aggroing you. This cuts off his shackle attempt and allows you to try to knock out the guard with your telekinetic powers. You're going to fail here because you're a malnourished slave who's never done this before, but that's okay because you can simply teleport back into the cage before the guards come over to whoop your ass. The first failed attempt gave me 4 levels in my assassination skill. Now all that's left to do is wait until the guards go back to sleep and we can try it again. Want to see why it's important to make sure you unlock this specific cage before attempting an assassination attempt? Oh, I forgot to mention, as a Kenshi character, you come equipped with the ability to phase through walls if you want to. It's actually one of my favorite exploits to abuse in this game, and can be used on anything from assassination attempts as you've just seen, to stealing items from chests through walls without being seen. I love it. Anyway, after a few more attempts, the sun was beginning to rise, so I took the opportunity to let Mike Oxmall fail an attempt and get his ass beat to work on toughness some more, all before he was sent back out for another day of exciting slavery shenanigans. And of course by that I mean sneaking for an hour until a guard catches me and hauls me away to yet another cage. I don't know if it's all the failed stealth attempts, failed assassination attempts, or the fact that I made this guard give me 11 pairs of shackles, but he's now seemingly been assigned to follow our protagonist around all day and yell verbal abuse at our hero. By nightfall, Mike was mostly healed up, which means it's time for more assassination attempts. After stealing a shirt from another slave, of course. After reaching assassination level 22, Mike was subsequently caught and beaten into another coma. As morning came though, I managed to head back outside and scoop up all of the prisoner shackles I'd left on the floor. These will become incredibly important, so hold on, you'll see. After another day of getting jumped by the guards, I noticed a new prisoner had been brought to the mines, a hiver by the name of Slowline. Legend has it, he's a great rich man, so naturally I stole all of his gear off of him since he no longer has a need for it. There's not much I can do with it at the moment though, I'm still too weak to make an escape attempt, let alone while carrying a large backpack, extra gear, and a weapon. So instead, I opted to stash all of the gear in a nearby chest where the Holy Nation soldiers would never think to look. Alright, back to assassination grinding. Another bit of cheese I like to exploit is the fact that you can spam click and effectively stack assassination attempts into a single animation. It sounds much more difficult than it really is, I promise. All you need to do is line up for a knockout attempt, but right as your character is about to finish the animation, just start spamming more assassination attempts. If you get the timing right, you'll see a shit ton of fails pop up on screen stacking up on top of each other. Each of those counts as an assassination attempt, meaning in the time it took for one animation to complete, you've crammed about 6 or 7 individual attempts in. Utilizing this method, I was able to tack on an additional 10 levels or so to my assassination skill before the sun rose and it was back out into the mines. I wanted to focus on grinding my stealth skill out some more here, but got distracted while trying to get a cool cinematic shot of Mike walking across the wooden platform, which inadvertently tipped off the guards, who proceeded to curb stomp our poor Mike into unconsciousness yet again. This would happen 2 more times on day 5, until nightfall finally came around and the guards gave up for the day. It was during this night, however, that things would finally start to change. Well, kinda. What I mean was I managed to get my first knockout of the playthrough. This was huge, because it gives me the chance to show my favorite way to level combat while in the mines. Unfortunately, we'd have to wait for another day, because for whatever reason, Mike decided to stone cold stunner the guard into fucking orbit, and given the fact that he's carrying over 200 kilograms worth of shackles and has broken legs, the guard woke up from his comatose state before Mike could even make it over to him. This time, however, the guard simply left Mike Oxmall for dead, instead of healing him. This was the first ah shit moment of the playthrough, because there really isn't anything I could do about it. Not only was Mike unconscious for almost 5 full minutes, but once that faded, he was placed into a recovery coma while his stomach injury proceeded to get worse. Meaning, at this point, we're entirely reliant on a random Holy Nation guard strolling past and finding Mike, while also having the medical supplies needed to heal the poor man. Luckily for Mike, though, 2 guards happened across his desecrated body while on their morning patrols, and managed to save his life. After spending half a day in a coma, Mike was released, only to be immediately jumped by the guards yet again, and put right back into another recovery coma. It would take the rest of the day to recover, and even then, I say recover, but his stomach is at a whopping 11 hit points, so... Anyway, it's time to run it back with the guards and hope we just drop them in the dirt instead of slingshotting them into the stratosphere. Want to see something funny? Don't ask how it's possible. I just like to think the guard actually did see Mike knocking out and kidnapping his comrade, but he just hated the guy so much that he was okay with a prisoner dragging him off into the night. Unfortunately, I fucked up here. Yet again. Instead of a spectacular feat of launching a human hundreds of feet into the air, I accidentally executed him by moving the kill button in his inventory. See, I like to play Kenshi with an execution mod. What this does is add a 1 cat item into most of the NPC's inventories. You right-click on it once they're unconscious or in a coma, and it immediately executes them by removing the item. I know it's a bit cheesy and overpowered, but it makes my playthroughs a bit more immersive when I want to roleplay as a full-fledged assassin. What I failed to realize, however, is that simply moving the execution item will insta-kill the NPC, even if it remains in their inventory. Sadly, I didn't notice this until I carried the carcass all the way up the hill and behind a big ol' iron node, wasting an entire night in the process. In a fit of rage, I tried to kidnap another guard, alerted 3 more in the process, managed to pull off some crazy jukes, and ultimately end up in an all too familiar predicament, such as the circle of life in Rebirth. By this point, though, my assassination skill had progressed to the point where I can simply spam attempts and 9 times out of 10, walk away with a guard. 3rd time's the charm, right? Well, as it would turn out, yes. After knocking out the guard, I stole his weapons and loaded all those shackles into his inventory, slowing him down immensely due to how encumbered the man was, before proceeding to literally kick the shit out of him. That being said, this is an incredibly slow grind, only granting me 6 to 7% of a level with each landed shot, and those are few and far in between. This is mainly to do with the fact that martial arts leveling scales based on the enemy's martial arts skill, and can also only be obtained by landing a successful hit on the enemy. This means that because the Holy Sentinel has a martial arts skill of -1, I'm only technically 1 level higher than him, so I don't get any massive boosts for leveling the skill, even though his defense is in the 40s. To distill this down into a simpler context, the higher the martial arts level disparity is between the two characters, the more XP you gain when you land a hit. Because the guards don't spend their time cosplaying as Randy Marsh or Bat-Dad, they're actually pretty shitty characters to train against, but they're also the only real option we have at the moment, so we'll have to make do with what's available. A key point to remember here is that because we're not operating as an obedient slave at the moment, Mike Oxmole's hunger is depleting again. If it drops below 71, he'll pass out, which becomes a major problem when you consider the fact that we're hiding out of the normal pathways that the guards tend to walk. All this to say, if we get knocked out from starvation, we'll probably die here, so sometimes it's worth it to let yourself be enslaved again. After a full night of kicking the air and occasionally connecting a shot, we managed to level up a whole 0 times. That's right, we gained 0 levels after like 8 hours of fighting. Different night, same plan. Knock out a guard, load him up with shackles, kick the air, and hope sand gets in his eyes. On the bright side, the guards are so encumbered that they can barely move, which lets me power level my dodge skill. After successfully cup checking a guard, I took a peek at my skill levels to see that we'd managed to earn a whole 1 singular level in martial arts after almost 2 full nights of training. With 2 knockouts under my belt, I was feeling confident though. So I sent Mike into one of those slave shops to try and take on an armed guard, only for him to get his chest caved in and leg almost chopped off. Given the fact that he was potentially 1 lucky shot away from death, I took all of day 9 to blend back into the surroundings and wander the mines as an obedient slave. This gave Mike an entire day to heal up and prepare for yet another night of fighting. Progress was slow, but the methodology was sound. Every night, Mike could kidnap a guard, drag him out to an isolated portion of the mining camp, and then take them on in hand-to-hand combat. More often than not, he'd wind up coughing up blood in the sand while the guard walked away, but contrary to the sound of it, progress was being made. We'd gone from landing 2 or 3 hits in a singular fight to landing 2 or 3 hits consecutively, with dozens landing in every fight. Sure, we still couldn't really win any of those fights, but that would come in time. There's no rush to get out of here at the moment. Sure, we were in yet another recovery coma at the end of the night, but we'd managed to go up from martial arts level 1 all the way up to 2 and 99%. So instead of gaining half a level every night, we were now gaining almost 2 full levels in 1 session. It may not seem like much, but that's not bad for a malnourished slave, at least in my opinion. Word must have been spreading though, because the Holy Nation assigned another guard to follow Mike Oxmole around the mines all day and berate him. In a moment of weakness, I tried to fight back, only to leave me in worse shape than what I started at. Since both legs were too damaged to train martial arts in a serious fashion, I opted to start collecting medical supplies instead. This way, I could simply heal myself if I was wounded and work on my own first aid skill instead of relying on the guards to do it for me. All I wanted was one cool cinematic shot of me walking on the bridge. Just let me have one. Just one time. No. Instead, we'll just get hit so hard we phase through the bridge. Want to see some good old-fashioned holy nation on Czech racism? Boy, they're really letting him have it, huh? Okay. This is where the grind really starts to become just that, a grind. During the nights, I'd focus on martial arts training. 99% of the time, I'd end up in a coma or unconscious with some serious injuries to Mike's head, chest, stomach, and legs. Because of this, I'd opt to spend the entire day in the business of minding my own business and healing up. It was clear that progress was being made though. For example, how often do you see a guard call for backup against an enslaved prisoner? Oh, and fun fact, if you kidnap a guard and throw them in a cage, they'll become slaves as well. Except, in this instance, because of the execution button, the guards will inadvertently kill the other imprisoned guard while in the process of taking all their gear, which I thought was pretty funny. Anyway, after 13 days, I finally managed to beat my first opponent in hand-to-hand combat. And not just like knocked them over after 1 or 2 hits, but legitimately beat them into unconsciousness before teabagging to assert dominance. Here's where I got, really stupid. At some point, while I was sleeping off another coma, one of the guards must have taken all of my medical supplies off of Mike. We're talking about 10 to 11 bandages, not an insignificant amount by any means. So naturally, I set off to find the jackass who did that, only to accidentally wake up an entire barracks, resulting in the following. This was one of the luckier moments of the playthrough by far, considering my cocksmaul is one leg shot away from gimping around the Great Desert for the rest of his days. Now, as luck would have it, 2 guards managed to scoop him up and bandage his injuries, meaning he's gonna be okay. It'll just take a day or 2 to fully recover. You know it's bad when the guards won't even let you be a slave in the mines. They just keep you in your cage all day. To pass the time, I started hoarding shackles again. Now I'm not sure if it's from all the sleepless nights of hearing his fellow guards getting assaulted in their sleep, or if he's just tired of dealing with Mike's shit after constantly having to re-shackle the man, or even getting faked out of re-shackling him, but I think it's safe to say there's an extreme case of PTSD happening right before our eyes. During the night, I managed to sneak out again and loot some more medical supplies to begin recovering my losses, only for them to be immediately confiscated, but outside of that, nothing crazy happened. It's not like there's much that can even be done, considering his head, chest, and leg are all in the one-shot range of putting him back in a coma, so it's all about taking it easy for now. Here's what the skills were looking like after 15 days in captivity. Not horrible, but I feel like they could definitely be better if I'd taken some more time to focus on individual skills, instead of constantly fluctuating between multiple at a time. So that's what I did, starting with strength. During the day, I'd carry around all those shackles that I'd crammed into my inventory. At nighttime, I'd kidnap a guard and throw them on my back for a 50% XP gain instead of 25%. At the start of day 16, my cocksmaul had a strength level of 22, with the goal of getting it up into the 30s or even 40s by day 20. Now, aside from a higher skill level, this doesn't really do all that much for us at the moment. Since we're still malnourished, that has a 90% impact on our strength level. But once we leave Rebirth and get our hunger situated, we'll have a noticeable impact. This is a great time to mention another bit of cheese that really helped with grinding. See, most of your day as a slave in the Rebirth mines is spent walking to a node and then mining that node. But thanks to this comment, I learned that you can simply move your character a small portion away from the node that your character is actively mining, and it'll reset them to move on to another rock. As the comment says, if you can master this, you're able to dedicate entire days to training strength, instead of having to allocate several hours to laboring, which is a useless skill in this challenge. On day 17, I got lucky and somehow bugged the game into thinking I was still following my job as an obedient slave, while also carrying around a guard. I'd never had this happen before, but I was even able to re-enter a cage while still holding the guard on my back. The only problem with this was the fact that no guards were coming to get me for the day, so I ended up breaking the glitch by escaping and toggling my jobs on and off. Even after doing that though, I still couldn't get a guard to come over, so I just took the kidnapped guard over behind the node that I've been training martial arts at, and continued leveling strength and peace. This was huge for me, because this method allowed me to gain an additional 25% XP throughout the day now, instead of just at night. The only real holdup with it was that it was temporary, given that my hunger was still draining, and if I didn't allow my Coxmall to be re-enslaved towards the end of the day, he'd just die of starvation. That is, unless there was a way to bypass hunger yourself? I don't know, without needing to surrender to the guards? Maybe something like dropping and re-equipping a pair of shackles, thus giving me the obedient slave job and bumping my hunger back up? What sorcery is this? Listen, I told you there'd be cheese, but I wasn't expecting to learn new cheese during the playthrough, so this was really cool to me, and it made me wish I'd messed around with this a bit sooner, because it would have saved so much time and effort if I knew all I needed to do was just re-equip the shackles to my feet. About halfway through the day, I was eventually discovered by another guard out on patrol, but was able to temporarily evade him by spam dropping the shackles. This only worked a few times though, because he'd walk away for a second or two, then remember I was just running off with his buddy, and he'd turn around and smack me with his sword again. They never did come to get poor Mike Oxmall back out of the cage though, so he just spent the rest of day 17 in timeout waiting for nightfall. I tried to repeat the process with another slave, but was caught almost immediately because of how loud the shackles are. So my workaround was simply escaping, dropping the shackles outside of the house, then going back in to steal that same slave. When I got caught a second time, I just said fuck it and went right back to kidnapping guards again. Funny enough, the guard I spent all night carrying around was the same exact guard who then decided to spend his entire day following Mike Oxmall all throughout Rebirth, spewing Holy Nation rhetoric at the back of his head. Anyway, by this point, I like to think I was really starting to master the whole sidestepping mechanic in the camp, using it to spend full-on entire days dodging equipment and mining nodes. By the time the sun rose on day 20, I'd managed to grind Mike's strength all the way up to 43, effectively doubling his strength level in just 3 or 4 days. Again, not super important at the moment, but it'll play a huge role later in the game. With strength covered, at least for now, I decided to move on back to stealth for a bit. Mainly because it's something that can really just be done in one day with a bit of luck. While you can take the straightforward method of just walking around in stealth until you inevitably get caught, I wanted to shelve that for now and take a different approach. After breaking out during the night, I ran up the southern hill until I reached the gate near the barracks. While I probably could have just escaped at this point, that's not part of the challenge. So instead, I stayed in stealth mode and started running circles behind the oblivious guards. It's not as fast of a leveling method as just walking around in the camp, but it's far safer and, in my opinion, more efficient, since you can do this indefinitely for hours, whereas stealth walking in the camp will ultimately result in you getting caught at some point. This strategy can also be extended into the day, since the guards don't patrol all the way up here, So you can really just do this until you're content. Well, that, or until the guards turn around and see a random slave dicking around behind them. Since my leg was too injured to really get away with more stealth activities, I decided to change focus back to Thievery for a night. Now, I hadn't done any stealing since the first night here, after one of the guards told me I had so much potential and then wished me a happy almost birthday. But it's been about 20 days since then, and I felt ready enough to give it another go. By 6 o'clock that morning, I'd managed to grind out Thievery up to level 73, which, if you think about it, that is 73 levels in a total of 8 or so in-game hours. Really less than that if you're thinking about it, but yeah, not a bad run there. That being said, I think it's time to get back to martial arts grinding. But instead of only grinding during the night, it's time to take this a step further. The methodology is the exact same. Kidnap a guard, load him up with shackles, and kick him a bunch of times. But instead of hiding behind stones, what if we move to the outskirts of Rebirth, up in the mountains on the hilltops, where no one would ever find us? There was only one problem. I forgot to take his sword. Luckily, the guard now weighs hundreds of kilograms, so Mike can just run away. Funny enough, during the day I managed to run into the exact same guard, entirely by chance, and was able to knock him out and steal his sword, setting me up for a legit grinding run after tonight. Oh, and I also kept my own shackles because once you give them to the guard, they're stolen shackles, and don't seem to allow you to proc a job as an obedient slave, which we need to not starve to death. Round 2 got off to a rough start when I wasn't able to proc the obedient slave job up here, meaning we're kind of on a tight deadline of needing to be back and enslaved before I pass out due to malnourishment. Even with that being a factor, Mike was still able to beat down the guard. And not just once, or twice, or even 3 times. It actually got to the point where the guard was damn near kicked into a recovery coma, at which point I had Mike head back down and get his shit rocked to save himself from starvation. The next day, I managed to yet again find the same guard and bring him back to the hilltop. What I did notice here, though, is that as long as I don't remove the shackles, the hunger bar is stuck in the obedient slave job. To make it better, I can still land hits even wearing the shackles. There's only one downside. Wearing those shackles just makes you prone to getting knocked out, meaning it's either get taken out in 1 or 2 hits, or risk dying from starvation. Alright, back to fighting. After successfully knocking the first guard into a recovery coma, I needed another target, so I snuck on over to the hillside gate and grabbed a second guard. Just kidding, I failed the knockout attempt and was subsequently Joe Swanson for my insubordination. So after around 3 or 4 days of kicking the shit out of the same guard over and over, it was time to move on to the next one. Mainly because our main target needed some time to recover. I mean, that and the fact he's still fucking up here in a coma. So, you know. Anyway, in the meantime, I'll take out Mike's repressed anger on a new person. It took less than one night to knock the second guard into a recovery coma, which means it's time to run it back at the front gate. Alright, but one of these days we'll get it. Another night, another guard. Well, that one ran away. So I've been doing this for 29 days now. This is the first time a guard has chased me up a mountain in an attempt to save a kidnapped guard during the night, which is crazy. And while I did manage to win the first fight, it's hard to beat two guards at once, especially considering that one of them still has a sword. On the bright side, they did just leave Mike for dead, so he was able to regain consciousness and heal himself up, which was really nice. They even let me kidnap another guard. How thoughtful of them. Unfortunately, Mike felt the need to slingshot the man back into orbit, stalling the grind until I could find yet another hiding out in one of the slave houses. At this point, I tried a different approach. I'm still gaining around 6 or 7% of a level with each landed hit, so I figured why not just try fighting indoors, where I'm given a +8 level bonus. It seemed like a good idea, and maybe it still is, but the obvious downside of this strategy is the fact that the Holy Nation will just keep spamming other guards at you for backup, and they all have swords. It sounds worse than it really was though. I still get the indoor boost. More guards means more dodge opportunities, and a chance for me to land multiple shots at the same time, drastically increasing my leveling abilities. Not to mention, at the end of the day, each hit still increases my Coxmall's toughness. I also think it's a bit funny that I'm starting to find a ton of other gear in some of these guards' inventory. A lot of these guys are carrying entire second sets of armor at this point, after looting other downed guards. Naturally, I had to make a point of emphasis to kick the shit out of these heretics. After winning about 2 or 3 fights, I took it upon myself to send Mike back into one of the barracks in search of all those medical supplies I'd looted off anyone back in the day, and it went about as well as you'd expect it to go. It's time to start getting bolder though. What I mean by that is, it's time to start fighting guards in broad daylight. This was a bit more difficult than anticipated, because multiple guards could always just storm you and toss you back in a cage, but I was starting to get pretty bored with combat at this point, so it was just another way to speed everything up. During most of the nights, I'd head back into the barracks and try to find my medical supplies, only to be continuously shit-stomped and thrown back out. Alright, it's day 32, and time for another skill check. Currently, we're sitting at 48 strength, rounded up to 49 from the percentage, 46 toughness when rounded up, 23 dexterity, 46 dodge, 23 martial arts, 82 stealth, 79 lockpicking, 74 thievery, 65 assassination, 48 athletics, and 13 field medic. I'm making a point to bring this up now because I think I'm about ready to end the skill grind. In place of it, I think it's time to stage an absolutely insanely stupid revolt and free most of the people trapped inside Rebirth. So on the night going into day 33, I started stockpiling food. This is important because, as we've discussed several times in this video, Mike is malnourished, and I want to show just how big of an impact that can have on a character. Take strength, for example. Currently, our strength is level 4. Let's fast forward a full day until the morning of day 34. This is what our levels look like when we're at a normal hunger level. Isn't that so much better? It feels nice to actually get to use the skills you grinded for. Or how about the fact that our weight carrying capacity is up to 63? Want to see a damage check? How about triple, even quadruple the damage output? It's so satisfying. Equipped with our newfound fitness, I tried to free one of the slaves, only to realize that some of these guys are complete raging bitches. Emphasis on the some, because others are straight up ride or dies, and we're here for it. The few that joined after leaving were instructed to continue heading on down the hill. Mike, though, well, he went back in to grab the backpack that I'd completely forgotten about when I left. After grabbing my gear, I got to work fighting some of the other guards and trying to free a few additional slaves. After an hour or so of an ultimately futile endeavor, I made the call to finally head north and escape Rebirth, thus ending the challenge. After reaching the safe house, it's time to take a final skill check. 48 strength, 47 toughness, 24 dexterity, 47 dodge, 24 martial arts, 82 stealth, 80 lockpicking, 74 thievery, 67 assassination, 48 athletics, and 14 field medic. Not to mention the backpack, all the food and medical supplies, the high-end specialist grade armor, all of which are going to set Mike Oxmal up to have a massive run going forward. Thank you all so much for watching. I have around 450 hours in Kenshi at this point, and it's absolutely fascinating to me that I'm still finding out new tactics, cheese, and even locations in the game with every new playthrough. And that's not an exaggeration. It's insane to think that this game was created by a single dev, and it makes me so damn excited to see how Kenshi 2 turns out. With that though, I'm gonna get out of here. Until next time, I appreciate you all. Stay classy, and thanks for stopping by.